financial emergency,
Mm.
something to that effect that was vague enough and didn't have a definition that we felt was more clarified by stating approval with the board of directors. And then the second place we made an adjustment was in item 1 at the bottom. We added, I think it had said just vehicle replacement, but we added capital facility maintenance as well, because we are charged with maintaining a state of good repair for all of those items. So we were sure to include that. And then with regard to the $5 million, that's something internally we've discussed with you as the committee. We talked with George briefly about it. That's an amount that we feel comfortable getting started with in a lump sum. Hopefully, if we get this policy passed through the board, we can get that in place before the end of this fiscal year. So we would have that fund established. And we did, for your reference, Dr. Acapo, when we were working to develop a policy here to recommend, we requested some information from our auditor on policies that they might have seen at other transit agencies they work with. They did share that not many of the agencies they had worked with over the years had money to put in a reserve. So we were in a unique situation. But I also was able to get some through the APTA CEOs group that I'm a part of, was able to request those from some other agencies that are members of the American Public Transit Association. And so we use those in the development of our policy as well.
So the 15% is just something that others have used, or how have we arrived at 15%?
We did base that off some recommendations that were in other policies. That was also a number that we felt comfortable getting started with, and also 15%, approximately 15% would give us a couple of months of operating expenses if we were to get in that situation at a point down the road, which is one of the things in the first part of the policy that, you know, if we had delayed grant reimbursements or unforeseen economic conditions and we had to draw down from the reserve policy, we could do that with notification to the board. We would also use this for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the 15% will amount to how many months of expenses? What's our, sorry for asking, but what's our monthly expenditure on average?
I believe the 15% would be about 2 months of operating expenses. If I'm remembering Nikki and I's conversation correctly. No, that's not right.
That's fine. We can discuss it next time.
Sure.
I will be honest with you. When I was a CFO, I used to go up to 6 months because tornado can hit, or things can happen where you can't get out before 2 months. You don't want to shut down completely, but for a beginning, I'm okay with it, but we can discuss it further.
One thing that is missing from this policy, I guess, is how frequently we would add to it. You know, it does just say agency funds in excess of the 15% cash reserve would be allocated to other priority projects, you know, as indicated in this policy. We say, you know, we're going to have, you know, a minimum of 15%. But I don't know if we would want to make that decision on a yearly basis through the budgeting process of a certain amount that we would want to contribute to the reserve each year, or if we would want to incorporate that in the policy somehow.
Yeah, to echo Dr. Acapo, I think what was interesting to me is there's not an industry standard of you need 6 months or you need a year. Because my previous industry I came from, we always wanted at least 6 months or a year in your fund in cash reserve.
Mhm.
Where transit, there doesn't seem to be an industry standard. So it's hard to pick a number. So, but then, and Jill explained to me, so let's say we have more than the 5 million in reserve, which like in our current our current scenario, we do have more than 5 million in our reserve.
Right.
Does that then go to the board to pick these priorities, or what has been in the past? I know we've been drawing down on our reserve previously in the past couple of years, so we weren't in the scenario to use that money.
Right.
How,
We've not really been, like you said, in that situation. The reserve has been there. Um, one that we draw down on, and it has helped in the budgeting process. It has helped us to balance the budget. There's always been a small gap, and it's helped to balance the budget. One other thing that the cash reserve is used for is, and you've heard Nikki talk about this at various times, that there's points during the year, or historically have been points during the year, where cash flow is a bit of a problem. Or maybe problem's not the correct word, but in November and December, we receive a large influx from the property tax collections. We use that throughout the course of the year. You know, we don't need all of that at once, even though we get most of it at once. And so we're drawing down on that. And so if we reach a point during the year where we've gotten into a situation where we need to maintain cash flow, those reserves have been there for that reason. And the two I had in my mind when I answered your question a second ago was 2 quarters. So it is about 6 months of, give or take, about 6 months of expenses that the 15% would help us float. Does that answer your question on what we've used it for, Jamie?
I was kind of going forward, what's the scenario when we have more than 15%? How do you foresee, and maybe we're not there yet, but how do you foresee the board saying, okay, we have more than 5 million, we're not needing it for cash flow, we're not needing it to balance our budget. Now let's make some vehicle replacements. Is that something that would just come up every quarter, every year, during the budgeting process? How do you foresee? We just haven't been in that scenario previously.
I think first and foremost, it would come up through the budgeting process when we do present for board approval. We present the operating budget, but there is discussion about the capital plan and what we allocate towards the capital budget. So that would be the first place that it would be discussed, and that would be for things that we could foresee, like the vehicle replacement or facility repairs that are going to hit a benchmark and need some attention or replacement. If things come up during the course of the year, capital needs, unforeseen vehicle needs, the wage and benefits that are mentioned here, or transit service requests, those would be brought to the board, and probably first brought to the finance committee for discussion as it related to the financial situation. I feel like my answer is not very smooth, but we haven't been in this situation previously.
Well, what it's used for though mostly is for non-recurring expenses. Okay, you can use fund balance for recurring expenses. And even using that to fill a hole in the budget is also a red flag. You only use it for one-time expenses or emergency situation or non-recurring. So those are practices that we have to develop going forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had in mind that the cash reserve is, your emergency fund. And then we probably should think about a long-term capital expense fund as well. And that's the fund that we would do these things that are mentioned, in excess of the 15%. So vehicles, building maintenance, those types of things. And what we're going to need is to develop, a long-term capital plan so we know how much money that needs to be, and so we can fund it accordingly. And all these discussions are good to have because before there really wasn't the excess in order to establish these accounts. And now that there is, we want to ensure that we've got the money in place for long-term sustainability of Lextran.
So would we, so question for the committee, are there changes desired to this policy before it's presented to the full board? Or what are the next steps you would like to take?
And remind me, we don't need a motion, right, to move this out of the finance committee to present to the board?
Yeah, we would just recommend it to them.
Make the recommendation during the board meeting.
And I feel
Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, I feel given our changes that we've discussed last finance meeting, this meeting, we're in a place, I feel, ready to recommend this to the full board.
I agree. Please, let's start somewhere.
Okay, so do I hear you correctly that we would like to present this as a resolution at the February meeting?
Yeah, let me look at one thing first, Jill. I'm looking something up.
And so that's where, while George is looking up, my question, kind of the revenues in excess of 15% in cash reserve, that's kind of a nice to have language, but really the policy are the two paragraphs above, right? That we will put 15% aside.
Correct.
So that was maybe what was throwing me off, that just when we have extra money, we can use it this way, but really the policy is the 15% above.
All right, so our annual expenses are in the $30 million range. So 15% is about 4.5 million. So the 5 million is slightly higher. And the monthly is about 2.5 million. So it's 2 months is what it is. So just for clarification there. So that's the only question in my mind is, do we feel comfortable with 2 months being the amount, or should the 15% be slightly higher? Or as this says, we're starting at 15% and we can add to it. Maybe we need to put a goal in here of a higher percentage.
We can start with 15%, but with a plan of growing that year after year slowly to reach a certain goal.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to kill them either.
Exactly.
Setting that too high, but we can get started from somewhere and then grow that way.
And so because this says a minimum of 15%, your staff was recommending to go ahead and put more than a minimum, put 5 million in. Is that what I'm hearing? And this is only 15% of the total operating budget, not of our total budget. Is that also correct?
Right. It total operating does not include capital. So,
which I think was 18 million this. Oh, total operating 26.
so it is more, the amount we're recommending to start is more than the 15%. And we have made that recommendation because we are in a position to do it.
Yeah.
We're in that position now and wanted to take advantage of that while we could do so. And the discussion on the 5 million, I guess, is separate from the discussion on establishing the policy and getting that approved to the full board.
Jill, think of a sentence you might add
Okay.
after the minimum percentage. You know, I don't really want to put a ceiling on it.
Right.
And as Dr. Ocampo said, we don't want to hamstring you by putting too much in it. But you know, something that says we'll be intentional about growing the fund, you know, to a larger amount
Okay.
that maybe the board deems appropriate or something like that.
Okay.
But I also would suggest removing item number 2 from there. Because if you add you use fund balance to increase pay, it's a risk. Because it's a recurring expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have the fund balance in 2 years, how would you pay people? So that is a red flag.
Well, and so this is the revenues in excess of the fund balance is what number 2 is referring to.
I'm not, okay, let's help me understand it.
I think that's where I was, you know, the 4 items is what we would use when we go over the 5 million. I'm going to just throw out, you know, but I'm not opposed to taking it out because that could just be the normal budgeting process. You realize the revenues are coming in pretty steady with property tax. We're in a place where our revenues exceed our expenses by more than 15%. We're going to increase raises.
And I mean, along those lines of talking about, you know, that's just discussing revenues in excess of what the established cash reserve is. You could take all of those things out.
Ms. Burnett, maybe I misunderstood you. Just help me understand what's the intent of that whole thing? Revenue in excess of the 15% cash reserve may be used.
You said, what is the intent of what part?
The bottom paragraph.
That last paragraph.
That was just to establish some direction and buy-in from the board and from, you know, to give direction to staff of basically, if we're in a situation where we have more than that minimum, what is the board's pleasure? What is the priority?
Okay.
So that we're not, you know, and I'm sure, you know, in your role of having reported to boards in various positions, you know, as members change through the years, desires and interests change as well. And so by establishing these items, that would give some direction and you know, verbalize or publicize a position on what are the priorities.
Got it. Right. So I misunderstood you. Thank you.
So maybe there, Jill, maybe you add a number 5, and that's where you put, you know, to add to the cash reserve.
Okay.
And then that takes care of what I had said before.
Okay. And we can work on that and kind of maybe work through that over email before it surprises you in February.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And can we also please have legal counsel review it since you work in union environments?
Absolutely.
I've gone through all this where union members can take anything like this and interpret it their own way. So we want to make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot.
And
we will do that. And I would also add that Scott from McBrayer is on this call, and Tyler from McBrayer was present at the last meeting when we went through this policy. So we will do that.
And Jill, just for Dr. Capo's knowledge, this is the first time our revenues have exceeded our expenses in several years.
Yes.
Do you know how many years? More than 3?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, a lot of it had to do with our debt payment was causing it.
that was a big part of it. That was a contributing factor. I can remember even in my first few years here, before we had that debt payment, that some of the reserve balance, if you will, was used to balance the annual operating budget at times.
Not good.
So just to give Dr. Capo some history on why, putting this policy in place is since we've had a previous policies in the right word, but habit of revenues exceeding expenses and then dipping into the reserve to balance our budget.
Yes.
Thank you.
And, Dr. Capo, I would also say that, there, you've heard us talk at the board meetings about the comprehensive operations analysis, which looks at our service level, service as a whole. There have been times throughout the course of the year where there were recommendations, for a budget reason, recommendations to suspend service in some areas or make staff adjustments. And there have been times that the board has had input on those things and did or did not want to proceed. So those things come up as well.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to the investment policy.
Okay.
And as you can see, this is 14 years old.
Dated.
Looked like it was typed on a typewriter.
Well, for your reference, we could not find a native document. We had to scan a document, so that's why it looks the way that it does.
So a couple of things on here, and this is the first time we've seen it. Is that right, Jill, when you put it in the packet?
I am 95% certain that this is the first time that it has been presented to the Finance Committee.
Yeah, so the director administration position no longer exists, so that needs to change. And I'm assuming that'll change to Nikki's position, right?
Yes, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, so that's Director of Finance and Human Resources. And, when you read the general objectives, because it's public money the way that it is, it does need to be very safe. And if you go down to the types of investments that you can make, so it's in section 4, you can see those are all very, very safe instruments, which is probably appropriate. And having it be liquid is probably appropriate. And one of the things I was discussing with Jill earlier today was collateralizing, whatever cash we have or cash equivalents that we have that are above the FDIC insurance limit, and it appears that those are in place with the bank that we use right now. So I did ask somebody at one of the banks that I do business with, and I didn't say what the agency was, but I said, what kind of program do you have for quasi-government agencies, and what kind of results have you had in the last 10 years with those types of investments? And I've not gotten the answer yet, although I expect to get it, just to have an idea. But I'm guessing that the returns are going to be pretty low based on this current investment policy. So I think one of the directions I'd like to give you, Jill, is to compare this to some other agencies similar to ours that might have money invested, and
Okay.
just see if their policy is similar, or if it's more conservative, or a little more a little bit more risk. Because in my mind, the $5 million in the cash reserve will be there for a long time, and long time money can probably stomach a little more risk than short time money can. So if we were to split into like a separate fund for capital expenditures, then that obviously needs to be very safe money,
Right.
so that you don't worry about the volatility of it. But if you've got long-term money, you might be able to have a little bit more risk in this policy. So I'm just curious to see what other people might have.
Sure. I will ask around both locally for other agencies that are kind of similarly funded to us, like the library perhaps, but as well as different transit agencies. I'll ask and see what I can get back from them as well.
Yeah, so Jamie and Dr. Capo, do you have any questions or comments on this investment policy?
The way we handle our foundation is through RFP.
Yeah.
And you have this investment firm come up with a proposal. And we always do combination of risk and high level risk and low level risk, and balance it in a way that we don't lose money at the end of the day. And also have some investment in materials that will allow liquidity in case they run into problem and they need 1 million ASAP, they can have access to that fund. So we do have this. You can talk to Mark. We have a policy, I believe, that we use for investment.
Okay.
And many other entities have it out there that we can borrow and tweak it and make it our own.
Sure. I did receive some information from Mick Breyer last night from Scott's colleague, because I had checked in with them. Didn't send them this whole policy quite yet, which I will, Scott, for you guys to review to make sure it's in line with current law. But I had asked Mick Breyer, based on current laws and regulations, what types of funds, what are our options for investing public funds, and got some information last night. So we'll compare that, and I'll share this with them for review, and also get some from other agencies, and I'll ask Mark as well.
Jamie, anything?
How much money do we currently have invested?
We don't.
None. Right. And so this would be
Right.
what we would be potentially with the 5 million or whatever's in the reserve policy, we would use this practice
Yes.
going forward. I don't know that I have any other questions, but just echoing, looking at other public agencies, and then their practice. And it would be nice to know, just in budgeting, even though they'll have really low returns, what that would look like. So previously I was in an organization where he had pretty significant amount invested, but it returned maybe a couple $1,000s a year. And so was that worth just the time to be able to take it out and for it to be liquid? So
Right.
that's also just something to consider, although 5 million should give you a decent amount, although not much.
Actually, if you find a good investment firm, the market has been really good lately. Even our foundation does not have that much in investment, but the return has been very encouraging. I don't know if it's going to continue that way, but if you do invest it well, I think 5 million, we will get something good for the agency on an annual basis.
And then that becomes a new line item in the budget
Yes, that you can use going forward.
Okay, so Jill, you're good on that, right?
Correct.
Thank you, everyone. Proposed agenda items. Our next meeting, is it all about the budget? Or does that come up later?
Generally, the March meeting is all about the budget, but it doesn't have to be. And if we want to meet to discuss something else, we can look for a time that works for everyone. So what is your pleasure?
We would like a report from David O'Neill.
Mhm.
And I mean, my thought is he can come to the finance committee. He doesn't have to come to the full board.
Okay,
And what he tells us is going to be important to the assumptions in the budget.
right.
So a big thing, obviously the residential side of real estate in Lexington is probably going up pretty substantially right now,
Mhm.
based on what I hear about people buying houses and selling houses. And then the commercial side, we just need to know what's happened because of COVID, if there's been impacts negatively on that, and then just see how the combined outlook is going to be for the next year or two.
Okay. I will reach out to him today.
Yeah. Jamie, do you have any other input as far as his report to us?
No, I just think any national trends or trends that he's seeing here that he can help us better understand property taxes over the next year or two. I know we were a little bit more conservative in property tax, just not knowing what was going to happen, and then commercial tends to lag. Uh, but I don't know if that's the case.
And then, of course, we'll have the operating budget. We can do it in one meeting. Just we'll limit David to a certain period of time.
Okay.
Maybe the meeting ends up being an hour and a half instead of shorter or something.
Well, and I suspect all of you have heard from him or seen him present at various points along the way. I know his full spiel can be lengthy, but
Oh yeah, and we don't need the full spiel.
okay.
We need to know what the assumptions are for budgeting reasons.
Okay. I will do my best.
Yeah, I was thinking more of like a 15 to 20 minute, total presentation, just what's happening with residential, what's happening with commercial. I know he goes in sometimes into like land use and what's available, and I don't know that we necessarily need all that.
He presented to the full board. It's been a couple of years. Jamie, you weren't, nor Dr. Capo, neither of you were on the board yet, but I believe George, I believe you were there, and it was 30 at least 30-minute presentation, but it did have all of the things that you mentioned, Jamie, like land use, what's available, what's not, what trends are we seeing with people moving into Fayette County. And that for that group was fine because it might not necessarily, folks might not have known all of that information, but we, like you said, just want to make some assumptions and have some information to base those on.
That's what I think.
Okay.
And then any ideas for other proposed agenda items? We'll have to obviously revisit the investment policy, and then we probably should talk about that long-term capital expenditure reserve.
Okay. I will make note of those items.
And this is where last year during the budgeting process, we added more funding for bus stops.
We did.
And so if that is, I forget the will of the board. Was that to continue at that pace for next year? Or do you think you know yet?
It is a project that spans multiple years anyway. So it wasn't intended to it wasn't intended to all happen at once, and it has been slowed by obtaining a contractor and weather, and we just finally received some shelters in stock that had been ordered since March or May, and so we just finally received those. So there will come a point, Jamie, where we can't continue at that pace, and I think that's a question that you had asked back then at that time. Will we max out, basically? So that project, we may not plan to keep continuing at that pace, but that project is still underway and still continuing.
Good. Okay. No need to revisit, but now I remember that we had budgeted or kind of planned for several years out at that level.
Sure.
Everything is on back order.
Everything.
You try me
Okay.
not work, but nothing can be done these days. It's ridiculous.
It's you can't get a door or a lock. It's incredible. All right, that is our agenda, and I don't, unless somebody has something else, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and Jill, thank you for the preparation.
Thank you.
And others.
Thank you.
Very good.
Stephanie Hoke is on this call and helped me tremendously in Nikki Falkenberry's absence. So thank you to everyone, and thanks to our IT folks who are helping with the streaming. So
Great.
Nikki will be pleased that I did not spend all of the money. She told me to do that.
Was that your instruction?
That was my instruction. Don't spend all the money, and don't let them spend all the money. So I said, noted.
Yeah. And Stephanie, thanks for those answers this morning too. All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Have a nice